having a rainy day, so I guess I'll be inside. I wanted to talk a little bit about some simple chemistry. Now, in our homes, we can find a lot of sort of useful, maybe not so useful things. Let's start off with something pretty straightforward. Muriatic acid. Now, what is muriatic acid? It's also known as hydrochloric acid. Now, in chemistry, we use different names to represent different things. For example, H is hydrogen, and Cl is chlorine. Sodium is Na. Of course, we know water is H2O. O is oxygen. And here is the hydrochloric acid, HCl. But this is not the only chemical that we can find. This is one of the most common chemicals. Now, this is iodized salt, so it has iodine compounds in it. But the main ingredient of this is sodium chloride. Now, a lot of times, these nutrition people, they always talk about sodium, 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 sodium. This is not sodium. Sodium is actually a metal. Now, this is not sodium. This is actually a combination of lead and tin. But you can see it's a relatively soft metal that's easily broken. It has a dull appearance due to oxidation. If this was sodium, it would have already caught fire and burned my hand. Sodium, when mixed with water, produces sodium hydroxide, which is NaOH. Sodium hydroxide. Now, what is sodium hydroxide? Well, here is a form that you used to be able to buy until the Federal Reserve's inflation caused the dollar store to become the $1.25 store, and they don't even have this size anymore. But if you could read it, it would say that it contains sodium hydroxide, which is called Li, L-Y-E. Sodium hydroxide is what's known as a basic solution. It is the opposite of acid. So when you think of something dissolving in an acid, acids like to dissolve metals. They can dissolve things. You could dissolve a coral rock in it, which, by the way, is calcium carbonate, which is going to be alkaline. But when it comes to some of these more common chemicals that we use, for example, baking soda, well, these all contain sodium in one form or the other. So, are we putting this on our food? What about this? What about this? You wouldn't want to put that in your food. Well, actually you could in small amounts. But here's the deal. And this is another thing that aggravates me. A lot of times you get these vegans and vegetarians and whole food plant-based, and they keep talking about, oh, meat acidifies your body. Acid, acid, acid. Acid is bad for you. Well, has anyone ever looked into our stomach to see what's in there? Guess what's in our stomach? Have you ever had vomiting where you threw up and you got that nasty taste in your mouth? Sometimes if you throw up on the concrete, you can actually see the concrete fizz or be damaged. Well, that's because our stomachs contain acid. And why do we have acid? So we can eat things like, I don't know, meat. Now, you could take plant material and put it in acid, and it would probably dissolve somewhat. But in most cases, plant material is more likely to dissolve in something that is alkaline. But we'll get to that a little later. Now, again, these are some of the basic symbols that we use for chemistry. You can see over here that the name carbonate refers to CO3. You got 3 oxygens and a carbon. Baking soda is called sodium bicarbonate, but you'll notice it actually has sodium hydrogen and a carbonate. Washing soda, which is known as sodium carbonate, has 1 carbonate, but it doesn't have a hydrogen. And the story that was given is that back then there was kind of a mix-up, because when you take sodium bicarbonate and you heat it up, you end up with half the mass. So they were saying, oh, it's carbonate. But Anyway, we understand molecules better, so we have a better idea. And by the way, calcium carbonate, or what we call coral rock, that's CaCO3. Now, these chemicals are all related in many different ways. And I don't have any bleach here, but if you've ever used chlorine bleach, you know that it is called sodium hypochlorite. And sodium hypochlorite is pretty simple as well, because what is sodium hypochlorite? Well, it's actually just a form of salt with oxygen in it. So what you could do, you could put salt in water and do a process known as electrolysis using electricity. And from this, you could make sodium hydroxide, and you can release chlorine gas, which can be mixed with water, and you can use it as a disinfectant. So it's pretty interesting. Now, for those of you that work with biofuels, you make biodiesel, or let's say you make your own soap, you're going to need sodium hydroxide, or lye. You used to be able to buy it, no problem. 50-pound bag, $50. But in the last few years, you can't find this stupid stuff. In fact, when I was a kid, there used to be these cans that were similar to these salt containers that contained lye. And if you had a clog in your kitchen, you dump it down the drain. And the lye, being extremely basic or alkaline, would break down fats and hair and other organic materials, and then you could wash it right down the drain. Now, the lye had no effect on things like rust. Rust, or iron oxide, you would need to use acid. Now, a lot of the old homes had cast iron pipes, and newer homes typically use PVC pipes. So the acid works just fine. Sometimes copper pipe was used for the under the sink trap or for some other fittings. You wouldn't want to use sulfuric acid, because sulfuric acid would make copper sulfate, and that would destroy the copper pipe. And that's what happened in my parents' house. Dumping all that hot power drain cleaner, which was based on sulfuric acid, would make it go bad. Anyway, back to the simple sodium chemistry. When we talk about sodium in the diet, what are we really talking about? Our body doesn't handle this the same way. And again, if we were to eat sodium metal, it would react with water, it would burn us internally. So that's not going to be a thing. But anyway, I just wanted to give you some ideas, and eventually I'm going to show you the method I use for turning salt into bleach, and also how to make sodium hydroxide using electrolysis in a homemade chloralkali cell. So stay tuned, and eventually the video will be made.